All right, let's cut this and we'll do a 10-minute wrap here of the debate. I don't know who wants to start over here. I mean, I think Bernie obviously, I think, did very well, or at least I think it's obvious that we all think that Bernie did well. The real question is sort of like, at the end of the day, was there any movement in the debate tonight? And I mean, I think Klobuchar helped herself. Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is,
I'm totally on her side now.
She helps herself at the expense of Pete, and I think actually Warren to some extent.
Well, this is the real question, because I look at this debate tonight and I feel like everybody sort of helped themselves on some level. I don't know if Buttigieg did, to be honest with you. I don't have a sense of that. I mean, I don't feel that. I feel like if someone was to watch this without sort of any priors, that there'd be a sense that nobody seems to like this dude, and maybe not necessarily know why. And I think that would hurt him a little bit. The only other thing that strikes me too is that I think there is this theory that every time Joe Biden doesn't lose a debate, he wins because he's in the lead. And I think that's true to a certain extent. But I also get the sense that he sort of like receded in this debate a little bit.
I think something significant happened with that too, because I think because Bernie, while still being very nice and whatever, but he actually went at Biden. And Biden, I mean, you can't score it. I scored a win for Bernie, but I think just objectively even, you'd have to at least score it a draw. And I think that there's something about you're seeing Bernie's like, hey, we're on the same stage together. Well, I don't care you're the former vice president. I went toe-to-toe with you, and you did not beat me. I think that actually is hugely psychologically and visually significant.
Yeah. I don't know if it. I don't know if it just it ends up in Bernie's favor per se. But I think broadly speaking, that was my sense, that as everyone else sort of like, and I think part of it is because you're dealing with almost half the number of people that we're used to seeing in these debates, that they all seem to sort of like come into their own a little bit. Even like, Yang was like...
Yang had a good night. Super likable.
Yeah. And I think they all made Biden look less uniquely presidential. And I think, look, we're at the stage right now. There's going to be 3 or 4 debates before I got the list right there. There's going to be... there's going to be one in Des Moines, Iowa on the 14th. And then I guess the next one comes, that's one debate before Iowa. Then there's one debate right before New Hampshire. And then I think one before Vegas and one before Charleston. And that takes us to the end of February. So to Super Tuesday, which is, I think, March, 7th or something. And so things are going to start moving. The pace of things is going to start moving. And I think everybody, it seemed to me, was dining off of Pete. Like everybody thought, like, I got 2 points to take from Pete.
Right.
Like, he's got 9 points, and I think 2 of those percentage points are mine, or 1 of those are mine. And I get the feeling that Klobuchar her plan was like, I'm going to take Pete. I'm going to be the new Pete.
Totally.
And I'm going to do that by, not picking a fight with Bernie or Warren, which I thought was interesting, or Biden.
No, she praised them over and over again.
I'm going to go right at Pete, and we're going to take Pete out.
Him.
What? Well, that's the thing that
provoking him. He was so
angry.
You could see
this guy has anger management issues.
No, you could see him flexing his hands, like thinking about strangling her several times.
I think there is a sense that no one on that stage. I think they like Yang and Steyer. They're like, we understand why you're here, and fine, your vanity project and this and that. But Pete Buttigieg really thinks that he can win, and it's offensive to us because he's such a cipher. Right. And I don't know if that comes across to your average viewer or not, but if it does, I think Pete's in for a rough go of it. And
he let the mask slip several times and revealed the ghoulish insect beneath the flesh.
I think so.
But I'm just saying, even though like that's what we think, but I really would say, regardless of, I'm gonna ask people I know that are at least neutral on him and say, like, did it seem to you like maybe he's a little impatient? Maybe he feels a little bit uncomfortable when challenged in any small way, like
maybe a little bit of murder in his eyes.
If I had to rule it in a grouping, I mean, I would say it was a good night for Bernie, a good night for Klobuchar. I think maybe still an okay night for Biden just because he didn't majorly lose.
I thought it was,
crap his
and he did
pants
fine.
that we know of.
Good for Yang because he was charming, and I would say not a good night for Buttigieg, I don't think. And then Steyer, whatever, and Warren. Honestly, maybe I'm overdoing it. I really think she had at least 2 times where she was on the way to something and did that selfie thing. And we can explain it, but I'm sorry, that was weird, and that is going to be the main takeaway of her performance. Because she didn't say anything else that was memorable.
To me, first off,
yeah,
I think. Let me just say the Buttigieg thing.
Oh yeah,
I think it's less about how Buttigieg reacted, and I think that people who are watching this and are not, sort of like totally keyed in. I think it's more just like I'm in a room. There's 8 people in the room, and 7 of them dislike one of them.
Everyone's got a problem with that guy.
And I don't even think about how this guy's reacting. I just sort of think that, like, everybody seems to have a problem with him. And so I'd have to disavow everyone else on that stage to come to the conclusion that they're wrong and he's right. I mean, I think that, like, on just a very sort of visceral level, that's a problem for Buttigieg. And
that ain't Barack Obama. I mean, just to really be clear, there were moments when Obama, I remember when he was running, where
he was a little bit of a dick.
Where everybody hated him on stage, but they hated him because he was better than they are.
Right.
It was not like, it was so clear. You'd watch and you're like, yeah, I identify he's the cool guy.
Ain't got
and
no
there's
haters,
a bunch
you ain't
of
popping.
haters. This is like everybody doesn't like him, and I'm not sure he's that likable.
I mean, there were times back when Obama ran that there was a feeling of he's a little bit too cocky on some level. Like there was a comment he made about like Clinton, like I can't remember.
You're likable enough.
You're likable enough. That type of
that
thing.
hurt him in New Hampshire
And
a lot.
but I don't think that sense is
awesome.
the same with Buttigieg. They think that he's a fraud, and I think that starting to come across. Who knows if that gets translated? And in terms of Warren, the only thing I could think about, and I think this is a problem for Warren, is that her campaign, I think that she has people who are advising her in her campaign who are just fundamentally misreading, her value proposition. And I think like the idea is like, make sure you bring up the selfies because that's going to appeal to young people. And there's no other explanation other than that. And I think it's like, it just reminds me of like an attitude that existed at MTV, 15, 20 years ago. It's like, if we want to appeal to young people, we need to have young people on TV. And it's like, well, wait, I was a young person and I watched older people on TV.
And they're not vetting. I mean, they also, even like the thing today, the Ed Buck thing actually matters.
Right.
Like
they're screwing up on some very basic stuff, particularly for her, whose whole, argument is you don't want to be corrupted by corrupt moneyed interest, and he's pretty corrupt.
Yeah, you mean like a guy who's probably allegedly, but with a high degree of, we're talking about
a pattern.
A personal murderer, if these stories check out, who has been insulated by millions of dollars while he exploits allegedly. And by allegedly, I mean, look the stories up.
Right.
It's insane that he's not been charged.
Right.
Young gay black men. And I don't think, clearly in this case, I want to be really clear for all my criticism of her. I have no doubt that she did not want or seek out that endorsement. But there's people in that campaign that are just like, oh, it's an Obama donor. Let's do it.
Yeah,
and that's a disaster.
They pulled that name off that list within like 30 minutes of it posting on Politico.
But then that leads to a second question, is that they either had somebody who was aware of who he was and did it anyways, or they are so checked out that it's just like, oh, Obama donors.
Exactly.
Which again totally contradicts her value proposition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's a lot of problems.
Okay.
Back to the
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
To the idea of appealing to young people, like, we know who young people already prefer by massive amounts, and he's not cool. He's probably never said the word selfie. young people don't want selfies. They want social democracy. That's it. That's how you appeal to them.
I mean,
it's kind of cool. Though.
The point being that you don't need to be perceived as hip to.
No, he's like a corny grandpa, and we like that about him.
All right, here is a look at this. This is far be it from me to quote the ethically and follically challenged Frank Luntz, but I just linked to that. Let's watch this video. He has got an LA Times focus group. And he asked them who they think won the debate. Only 6 of them came in tonight with Bernie Sanders as their favorite, but 10 of them thinks that he won their debate. Here, let's just watch this. It's Frank Luntz, but
Tom Steyer won the debate. None of you. How many thought Andrew Yang won the debate? We have 3 people here. How many of you thought Mayor Pete won the debate? None of you. How many of you thought Elizabeth Warren won the debate? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9.
Good.
And how many of you thought Bernie Sanders won the debate? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Now this is significant because only 6 of you walked in here supporting Sanders. Those people who are not voting for Sanders, but you thought he won the debate, explain to me why. Yes.
I thought his personality came through quite a lot, and for me, that immediate reaction, I always imagine somebody going up against Trump, and that to me sparks like why he won tonight going against his people.
Tell me why.
Because I think he had passion with his answers. He's for the people, and it comes through his answers that he gave us.
Yep.
wow.
There it is.
Oh, man.
I mean, we all did see that. Like, I know we have biases, but we've all been able to say on certain nights, like, hey, I think he's obviously right on all the issues, but he was a little tired. The debate wasn't amazing. We all saw that. Like, he did a really good job.
It's hard, though, sometimes because we're not always right. We live in a little bit of a bubble here.
The thing that I thought was most interesting was that no one thought that Mayor Pete won the debate. And I think the bottom line is that even though I think in certain, moments that he may have sort of come out on top, I think even when he won the little battle, he lost the war of the evening. And I think it's just like, people read, like if you walk into a room and there's a sense that everybody doesn't like that guy, there's some people who say like, well, I like that guy because everybody else doesn't. But the vast majority of people are going to be like, I've only got a limited amount of time on this earth and I'm not going to spend it with that dude.
That only works with Trump. It literally only works for him.
I'm more willing to stipulate, actually. Like, I can be more clinical about Bernie than I can be about Pete because I dislike him so much. But I really would find it hard to believe.
I think
that he wasn't looking at camera in most of the time.
Well, that was also that weird thing where he had this thing where he was looking at the wrong camera or he was talking to some other group, or he was the only one who did not have the proper eye line.
I think if there is a major shift from this debate, I think Bernie definitely helps himself, but I think if there's one, like, this person was here, now, like, Harris-style free fall, I think it is Buttigieg to Klobuchar. I think that actually might happen.
Which is fine. Like, just to be clear, she is a better person than him. And I look forward to seeing her whip him 6 ways to Sunday.
I wish she had apologized about all the staff stuff.
All I have to say is, right after Bernie did the thing where my friend Joe has 44 billionaires that are funding him, Pete has 39. Hey, Pete, why don't you try to beat Joe?
Amazing.
Best line of the night. Klobuchar did come in, but then Steyer comes in with this, which is so...
Fighting those corporations and beating them and building grassroots organizations to push power down to the people. That's what I've been doing for a decade. But let me say this. There's someone who's loving this conversation, and his name's Donald Trump.
That's right.
We know how he's going to run. He's told us last week, he looked at a group...
Anyway, says we can't have conversations like this, and that's the worst tendency in the Democratic Party, in my opinion. That is so avoidant of having these sorts of discussions.
What do you think they're going up against?
But it's not just that. They want to avoid these conversations. The people who are saying we need to avoid these conversations are the ones who think they're not going to come out well if the conversation continues.
Right.
And it is the same sort of impetus of like, we need to be less partisan. We need to be less strident. Buttigieg was on this kick where it's like, we don't need to be rubbing stuff in people's faces type of thing. And look, that has not worked. I've watched this for 20 years happen. Go to Joe 3030. Play that. I just linked to another thing, and this is really interesting.
Wait, can I just, while we're getting that, can I say we might be wrong about Pete Buttigieg, because the ever insightful Clara Jeffrey of Mother Jones has pointed out, I feel I must point out that crystal chandeliers and $900 bottles of wine aside, wine caves are a big part of regional agriculture. They are everywhere. Do you drink wine?
Mother Jones,
it's been in a cave.
Wow.
So I think maybe Mayor Pete actually didn't have any problems.
I feel like somebody may have missed the point of that.
Oh my God. He's not making wine in the cave. Politics. He's not down there like crushing the grapes with his feet.
And I suspect that most of those wine caves are not like that.
I would suspect so.
But I don't know. But I don't care. That is a very, very odd point to make. Here, play this.
Here, let's cut to Wyatt.
Is this the thing I just sent you?
Yeah, but it was running live. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, the interesting thing is, and maybe it happens here. I don't know, right? Maybe it's queued up there. This is from Frank Luntz. Bernie's answer about fixing the Middle East scored well with my Dem debate group. We must not be just pro-Israel. We must be pro-Palestine, too. And this is interesting because this is not something that really anyone in either political party wants people to be aware of. That from an electoral standpoint, the fact of the matter is at the very least, the Democratic Party recognizes that Palestinians are human beings and deserve human rights, and they are not getting those human rights at this point. And you cannot take that Bernie's. I mean, that's not just what Bernie's answer was. I mean, Bernie's answer was also, it's on the table. We leverage what we do to get them to recognize Palestinian rights. It's really interesting. And according, he also wrote, from a dial scoring perspective, tonight's Dem debate is going better for the progressive candidates and for the moderates. My group contains both. Well thought out. I mean, this is something, and I was on, I did Chris Hayes' program. We pre-taped it for Christmas and for New Year's, same show. And the other people on the panel were convinced that we were moving out of a period in these debates where we would see policy distinctions as the premier part of the debate. That it's going to be more sort of like step back, and I really disagree with that. I think I think the smaller a group of people we have on there.
Right.
I mean, look, I don't know that anybody actually just sort of says, like, I've done the analysis on these policies, and this is better than that, or whatnot, or I'm an ideologue or whatnot. But there's two things. One is it behooves the Sanders and Warren, not the same candidates, but certainly to the left of everyone else there. It behooves them to draw distinctions. And it is, of course, Pete doesn't want to do that, and Biden want to do that. They just want to make it about, it's being pragmatic. We're not making policy decisions. We're making political assessments. But the problem is that translates to, in terms of the level of confidence that you project and the level of passion that you project. To make an argument that I'm the pragmatic one, Biden sometimes achieves this by just being like a sort of a little bit of a douche. Like, I'm telling you, this is the only way it can happen.
Right.
And he gets to that passionate level of just like, nothing good's going to happen as long as I'm president. I'm telling you that right now. It's straight right from the horse's mouth.
Amy's got a little of that going on.
She totally does.
She's like, no.
Buttigieg does not understand how to do that.
No.
And he thinks it's like, what we got to do is it's going to take something. We got to come together.
He's trying to be Obama without Obama's like.
Well, all his training
qualities.
Listen, Obama's training was as a community organizer in speaking to groups. His training is corporate in the context of the military and corporate in the context of consulting. And so it's going in there and basically just, how do I say these buzzwords? Create a sense that I am genuinely invested, that I understand the heft of the issues that we're dealing with.
Yeah, he thinks it's down here when it's really up here.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's exactly right. And so I think Bernie and Warren are going to pursue their policies, but what's going to get communicated in their pursuit of their policies is an energy that I think is going to be stronger. And I think, frankly, Bernie did that better tonight than Warren did. And I think, again, it's easier for him. I mean, it's easier not because of who he is. I mean, and I think to a certain extent, there's always a gender issue. And I hope that people understand that that's always sort of, I think, there. But it's ultimately easier for Bernie because he is what I think some people see as hubris, or some people see as sort of monomaniacalness. It's not the right word, but you people know what I mean. That he doesn't compromise.
Yeah,
he doesn't compromise, and so he can.
No bullshit.
That's not him being egotistical. That's him being committed to the future of the working class.
I mean, however, like even putting aside sort of like reading the intent in there, I'm just talking from a performative basis. It's so much easier if you are going in and you're playing a no nuanced character. And, from an acting perspective, you might want a little bit more nuance and some self-doubt in there, to make the performance better. But from a politician, you want, I can't remember what the saying is, strong and wrong. It doesn't is better than weak and right. Than what?
Weak and right.
Weak and right.
But I think that
strong and right.
But I think that
even better.
But Bernie, I mean, I actually do think he's adding. I mean, not the doubt part, but he's bringing in more humor. He's bringing in more of these other traits, which I think he should.
The take my name in vain, I thought, was like, not the best of jokes. I mean, I think sometimes that plays in.
And I'm white. I don't think that.
I thought that was I thought that was hilarious.
He's a bit awkward.
I think he's got to take some of those.
Bernie is God, and we shouldn't take his name in vain.
Well, but I mean, honestly,
I think he do. It's again. He did it perfectly, actually, in the debate when he first came back. But some people literally only see him shouting diatribes about, like the top 1% of the half 1%, which is great. But you need to leaven it with a little bit of humor.
Yeah, like the guy said, he showed his personality.
Yeah, he showed it. Exactly. And that is, by the way, a good trade up against Trump. Bernie will know how to do that. Matt and I used to do this bit where Trump goes like, crazy Bernie. And he's like, oh, yeah, Mr. Mental Health over here. Right. Anyways, the top 1% of the top 1% of the top. Just boom, back to it.
I think he salvaged the take my name in vain. I think he realized like he played into a narrative he doesn't want, where he thinks he is, God, and said like, you hurt me. Like, I think like
himself.
The type of
even Joe was into it.
He needs to be a little bit more self-deprecating in the humor. It seems to me.
Yeah.
But
I think you're right. But humor is the good path, is my point.
Bernie, I think, was right about one thing. Well, he was right about many things, but he spoke of the need to redraw the electoral map, to get people out who don't normally vote, who maybe have never voted before, particularly poor and working class people. And in order to do that, you have to cut through the noise. And it's possible, because everybody is trying to talk like Bernie in this debate, it's possible that people won't be able to tell Bernie from the fakers. But every single time he had the chance to do it, for the most part, he did. Like, he knows people hate filling out forms. Anyone who's ever had to fill out a FAFSA is going to be like, yeah, right on. Anytime they talked about identity politics in a way that was like sort of the politics of elite representation. Bernie pivoted to talking about real material issues. They brought up trans rights. He brought up, oh, we're going to cover your transition health care, which is a pressing material need that most trans people have in this country. They talked about race. He talked about the effects of racialized capitalism and inequality, which again affects the majority of people of color in this country. He talked about, immigration. Well, okay, he did miss the chance to bring up the connection, I think, between labor and the criminalization of migration. But he does that in his plan for immigration, which I think nobody else really does in their platform. So my hope is that he will be able to cut through the noise and redraw the map in a way that turns people out.
I think all of that is true, except for the premise of those people who are on the margins that he's going to bring into the election, if that happens, are not watching this debate. I think almost definitionally, the people who watch these debates are high propensity voters.
On the flip side, I saw a great tweet though. I'll find it later on my timeline. But I
may be wrong, but
it's not just people on the margins
tweeted out.
Either.
She said, "I'm watching it with my mother, who's certainly a high information voter, and she's torn between Warren and Sanders." And she said, when he said the thing about filling out forms, she whooped.
No. I agree.
I get that.
No. I'm saying something separate.
Oh, no,
because I'm saying something separate.
Yeah.
I think what he was saying particularly about the forms, was very powerful for everybody. I'm just saying that the case about him bringing in other people, that is something that I think just has to be shown, not even told, because when you tell it to people, it just sounds like we've heard it before, because we have. Mm-hmm. Every single cycle, there's a candidate who argues they're going to do that. And it is wasted time because those people are not listening. Those people are people that have to be reached by the organizations that he does, which I think he's doing, and we'll find out in Iowa. I do think the other stuff, particularly the forms and that, sounds so banal, but is really resonant. But I did find that when he is talking about people of color and women, it's I don't think there is the general allergy to the idea of talking about identity politics. And when you're doing a debate, which is necessarily the sort of the high propensity voters, and you're talking about I have no idea what the breakdown would be of people, but I think, and I understand that there is an ideological reason behind this, and I understand he may very well believe it, and it may be the case that it's true. But when you talk about racism and attribute it only to the economy, because he says in this economy, he would phrase it, Black people are incarcerated at a higher rate. In this economy, we have a higher mortality rate for women during childbirth. It is not simply a function of the economy. It is also a function, again, we cited the opioid deaths. It was in part a function of doctors simply being, there were two things. One was a lack of insurance, economics, and the way that we're set up. But the other is that doctors, it has been shown with studies, do not accept the idea of Black people being in pain in the same way they do white people.
Well, I didn't prescribe it.
He's tying these issues together.
Well, I understand he's tying them together because he sees them that way.
But there's one element.
But the second part of what I said, that doctors look at Black people and say, I know you're coming to me and you're saying that you're in pain. I don't believe your pain is real, is not an economic issue.
There's one issue, though, that there's one thing also, though, that he did that we got to pay attention to, too. And I think the point you're making has some validity to it. It's subtle. And frankly, I don't know if anybody achieved that on stage tonight. Certainly not the level of specificity.
No, I don't.
Definitely not the level of specificity you're talking about. But what he actually did, and it reminded me, I'll speak, after hours here. I was very annoyed with the Henny Lopez interview. I think was the author's name. He had some very interesting ideas about how to connect economics and race in terms of talking to the electorate. And Bernie does specifically what that guy talks about doing more than anybody else. And that's the third piece of it, which is he doesn't only just pivot to the economy, which I still think strategically that is the through line. You got to connect with people. I don't think there's any other broad common bind, even just practically
I'm not saying
speaking.
you shouldn't talk about the economy,
I understand
but when
your
you're talking
point. I get your
specifically
point.
in terms of...
So say there's 3 stools, though. There's like 3 pillars. There's the economic binding, which is foundational and really important. He does that really well. There's the subtleties you're talking about, which he can improve on, as they all can, frankly. And then there's the third part, which is he goes strong at how Donald Trump's demagoguery and racism is the antithesis of his project and is fundamentally divisive and fundamentally discriminatory and fundamentally antithetical of his entire goal set. And that's actually what Lopez said you needed to do very clearly. And he's actually doing that more robustly than anybody else on that stage.
I agree. I just think that, like, to our experience, it may seem nuanced. My sense is for black people, for people of color, it's not quite as nuanced, that it's more centered in their experience. And I think to a certain extent, just from a communication perspective, because I do think that, there will be material difference, under his program, that it will change. But in terms of connecting with people and acknowledging that experience as being centered in some people's lives, even if there is a theory that it is a function of something else, I think that he needs to work on it.
So I agree. But we still also can look. There's a new NPR poll. He is the most popular, with the exception of Biden, with African American voters. Overall, across all demographics, he's the most popular candidate, hands down. And I think that's another reason, too.
People of color, yeah.
People of color across the board. And that's, to me, also, though, is another reason that I could tell you in terms of polls, and at least anecdotally, of course you hear that about Sanders and, frankly, any other white candidate. And, by the way, Obama, too, if you talk to people. But there is that major economic divisions within different groups. And when you talk to somebody who's from a blue-collar background of different, that connection is extremely apparent.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to weigh as well.
Look, most people of color are working class because most people are working class. Most transgender people are working class because most people are working class. And the most pressing need for working class people is adequate health care and access to education and other things with material effects, like, maybe the cops shouldn't kill us so much anymore. And if I were a working class trans person listening to this debate, right, and no candidate is perfect, but I have a choice between a candidate who's going to emphasize reading a list of names in the Rose Garden versus getting me access to the health care that I need, like, I know which one I would choose.
A great moment for me, last thing I'll say, is I actually think on the level, and it just happens to be a happy coincidence, it wasn't the driver of it, but I thought his most humble moment was just saying, I was wrong about the Afghan war vote. And there was, and which he was, and there was, and over 90% of the population was. And then he said, the one person that was right happens to be an incredible leader, Barbara Lee, who, incidentally, just to be really clear, is like, they have a huge amount of respect for. She has not endorsed him. There's no she might, but she initially was a Harris supporter. I thought that was a very clean moment.
Actually,
people don't normally do that in this kind of scenario.
Not to cite Frank Luntz again, but I'm pretty sure that he did better on that on the Afghanistan response than Biden did.
Of course.
All right, so that's that. We'll be back tomorrow to wrap up the decade. We will take 23 hours to do that, and 22 and a half will be on the past month of the decade.
What do you mean 23 hours?
Huh? We're going to start the show tomorrow at noon.
Yeah, that's in 13 hours.
No, and the show's going to last 23 hours.
We're going all day tomorrow.
To do the decade, and 22 and a half is going to be dedicated to
decade, vacation, whatever. At 2:45, when somebody calls and talks about thorium,
we got to break it now.
I got to cancel my appearance on Mike from PA's Twitch.
There you go. Sorry, Mike from PA. All right, folks, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid.